Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Bicep community call of May. Pretty excited on some of the things that we have going, but it's going to be kind of a short call because we don't have too many things to update on. What is the community call for? It's for you guys, not for us. I say this every time, but you get updates that we otherwise wouldn't cover in our own calls and content. We want to give monthly updates instead of once a year, maybe twice a year updates, so that we can keep you guys involved in the whole process of helping us make decisions and new features that we want to share with you guys. Please use the chat. The chat is always really active, which I really appreciate. We have our whole team in the call to answer any of your questions. And yeah, like Alex said, hope everyone is having a great build week. You can ask any questions in the chat, but you could also raise your hand in the team call and we can unmute you and you can ask the question directly to us. Okay, O.18 release. So Bicep parameters is finally out for O.18 in hopefully the 1st of June. Could be pushed back a little bit, unfortunately, by a couple days, but please look forward to that. We're removing the experimental flag for Bicep parameters, and you can finally be able to use it if you haven't been already. Some of the things that we are going to be releasing in O.18 is environmental variables. So support for reading environmental variables directly in a Bicep param file and set it as the parameter value. This is something that Hadwa talked about last week, and she's been working on it diligently, which we really, really appreciate. And if you have any questions, please put it in chat. Some things to note is that the parameter will be secure in the main Bicep file to ensure that value isn't exposed in deployment details. It will be evaluated at build time, and the functionality will only be available in Bicep param files and not Bicep files yet. And yeah, if you have any other questions, put it in chat. Get secret support. This is something that I will pass off to Engin in a little bit, and he's going to talk about this a little bit more. So I'll leave that for Engin to share. Param's decompiler. This is something that Mohammed has been working on, and it will give you the ability to decompile a JSON params file into a Bicep param file. You'll be able to do this in CLI and VS Code deploy function. We don't have a working demo yet because still currently being worked on, but stay tuned for documentation on how to use it and a possible demo in the future. VS Code deploy Bicep. This allows you to use the current deploy function to read parameters from a parameter file and complete any missing ones. If you use the deploy Bicep function, then you'll understand what we're talking about. You can test it out when it's out as well. Generate param support. Engin had previously talked about this in the past community call, but basically what this functionality does is to generate a parameter file based off of the Bicep template, which is a pretty cool thing to do. Right now, there's only support for this in the CLI and VS Code extension. I'm going to mute everyone if that's okay. Okay. Sorry. 1 second. Oh yeah, okay. Things to note is that this will only work for parameters defined in the given Bicep file with no default values. And if you have any other questions about this, please put it in chat. Engin is here to answer any of your questions on that. A little bit more about the next release for Bicep, I will share in a little bit after this O.18 release notes. In O.17, we noticed that there was a breaking change and wanted to address it here. So previously, if you have an item in a loop, you can name that the same as a function. So in this, at the side here, you can see that you can use the name resource group as an item in array, even though it is a function. Unfortunately, we decided that it should be default behavior to not be able to use a function name as an item in a loop. We talked about this as a team and thought that this should be the default behavior. So I'm sorry if this might affect any of your current files, but please know that we came to this decision as a team. And yeah, Jeremy's right, help reduce confusion a lot. Another bug that we saw was that there was a metadata clash with symbols. So what we noticed was that if you have a metadata name the same as, say, a parameter name, it will return an error that the name isn't found when you use it in a resource definition. So we fixed this, it won't clash anymore, and it should be fine. Okay, moving on to future releases. So some things that we thought we could do in 0.18 needs to be pushed out a little bit. Sorry about that. Like custom types, still working on that, will be out by next month for sure. And deployment stocks public preview. This has been sort of pushed back a little bit in the past, but it should be ready by July. And we've been working diligently on that for public preview. 0.19 will also include private networking for deployment scripts and a prettier formatter. So one of our engineers has been working on having a prettier formatter, and he will demo this next month. 0.20 will have our MS Graph provider. Fingers crossed, hopefully that we can get it out by August. Could be moved back, but we've been working on this pretty diligently as well with the MS Graph team. Nothing else has changed in the O.star and 1.0. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about Bicep Param's upcoming features. Let me share that issue right now. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see my screen. Thanks, Engen. So we're going to have our first release out this month, like I said, and for our upcoming features, instead of having a second and third release, we just want to have one area where we could have all of the upcoming features listed. So we took into consideration a lot of what you guys had requested from parameters, any features you guys are interested in, and we talked about it amongst our team to see what we wanted to prioritize. So something that a lot of people had asked for was adding supplemental parameters in the command line, in which you can define more than one parameter in the command line and overwrite parameters as well. This is going to take a little bit of time because it's a little bit more complicated than we originally thought. Did a lot of investigation on how best to do this, and there is a gist that is linked at the bottom from Alex for our engineers, basically his design of how he wants this to look. So we have that prioritized. Please look forward to it, but it will take a little bit of time. We have some other things that we want to also include in the upcoming parameters releases. So please get the chance to look at this. And some things that we would want from you is feedback and upvotes on either of these. And any other features that you guys may want, please comment it in this issue as well, if we may have missed. And that is it on the Bicep parameters upcoming features. So now on to Engen with the get secret Bicep param support.
Perfect, thank you. Let me share my screen super quick. Yeah, this must be the screen. And let me know, please, if you can see my screen. Cool.
Yeah, we can see.
Hi there, my name is Engin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm based in Seattle area and there's a beautiful weather outside. So just like a good summer day, if you also have a good weather, take a short walk outside. I will do that too. So today I'd like to share with you the Git secret helper function experience in Bicep Param files. And also I'd like to get your feedbacks, questions, and comments about it as well. So when we want to yeah, here it is. So when we want to make our deployments even more secure and fill some of the parameters with values from a secure place, we can use Azure Key Vault resources. Current experience is like this. We can define a Key Vault resource on a Bicep file and create the Key Vault first, or get a reference of an existing Key Vault. Then we can use this resource to reference a secret. But the thing is, this kv.get secret, like this function, must be used in a module. That means we cannot reference the secret to a parameter or a variable or directly in a resource definition. So it must be used in a module definition. And there are two reasons that blocks us to use this syntax in a Bicep Param file. First, Bicep Param files only provides values to parameters, and we cannot directly assign kv.getSecret function method to a parameter. And second, with the current experience, unfortunately, since the resource definitions in the Bicep files are not available in the Bicep Param files, we don't have access to this KV resource in the Bicep Param file. So that's another blocker. So design proposal for is, get secret helper in the Bicep Param file is to have a get secret function in Bicep Param files. With this function, we basically accept subscription ID, resource group name, key vaults name, and secret name as required parameters, and secret version as optional parameter. So you can reference a totally different key vault that is not related to the current deployment in your deployment. And since the deployment's authorization context have access to the key vault, Azure ARM backend, when it receives your deployment, at the deployment time, can access to the secret value and use it to populate the parameter. And we can use this parameter with any resource we want, this SQL password or web password parameters. We can use those parameters with to populate any field in any resource we want. Basically, they are just another parameters. And to keep the idempotency, we serialize this get secret function as this special syntax. So in this syntax, parameters have a reference structure instead of a value structure. So at the deployment time, backend can reach to the key vault, get the value of the secret, and use it. And if we provide the version of the secret, like the secret version, we can pin a specific version of the value of the secret. So even if the value of the secret change, deployment context will be the same. And ARM backend will get the new value and do the deployment. And so that's pretty much it. What do you think about this new feature? Please let me know. And to save time, me and my team will be available over the chat. So if you have any questions, comments, anything, please send them to us. And back to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Engin. Let me share the rest of the PowerPoint. Yeah, please ask any questions in chat, or at the end of this call, we also have Q&A. Something that is really exciting that we talked about, I think, 2 calls previously in chat was the Azure Discord. Carl, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Stephanie. This was a pretty quick one. A couple of calls ago, there was a couple of questions in the Q&A period of people requesting a way to either get more instant feedback help on Bicep issues or for the community to help the community out. There was already an established Azure Discord, so we thought it'd be a good idea just to announce that here, and here's a link to it for everybody. You'll find in there a couple of MS employees like myself in our spare time. Primarily, this is obviously a community environment, helping out where we can, and it will be a great way, hopefully, for us to collaborate, communicate, help each other out. As I said, it is community driven. If you do need official support, please do use the existing official support channels. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Carl. On to CIDR Functions. Marcin?
Hey everyone, let me share my screen here. So yeah, hey everyone, I'm Marcin. If you've been paying attention to our release notes in Bicep 0.17, we released basically a set of 3 new functions that help with dealing with IP address ranges in CIDR notation. So here I've got a Bicep file just for demo purposes. By the way, is this Zoom level good enough for everybody? Can everyone see? And I can't see the responses. So, yeah?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. There's a hand up. Ben Jacobs, you have your hand up? Oh, never mind. Okay. Yeah, so
sorry.
no worries. I've done that before as well. Yeah, so we've added basically a set of 3 functions to help dealing with CIDR, basically manipulating CIDR IP address ranges. The first function, and actually before we do that, let me just deploy this file so it finishes while we're talking. The first function that we added is called parse CIDR. It returns basically given a IP address range in CIDR notation as the first and only required argument. It returns an object if it's a valid CIDR address range, that is. It returns an object with some properties of that, basically, that we parse out of the address. So you get the network and CIDR portion of the address that you specified. We compute the net mask. We give you the broadcast IP address, as well as the first and last usable IP addresses that are basically available to use for hosts on that network. If you would like to instead calculate subnets on or basically split an existing IP address range into smaller ranges, we've got a CIDR subnet function for you. In this example, I basically run a loop from 0 to 4 and split the /20 range into a /24, and then basically return the first 5 subnet ranges. The function itself takes 3 arguments, all required. The first is the initial address range. The second is the desired size of the subnets in terms of bits of basically the host IP address. And the third argument is the index of the subnet. So it's 0-based. So if you want the first subnet of that range, you basically set it to 0. In my example, I basically ran it in a loop from 0 to 4 inclusive. And if you deploy that, you get basically these IP address ranges. And the last and third function that we added is called CIDR host. It will calculate the IP address of a host on the specified IP address range. The first argument is the IP address range, again in CIDR notation, and the second argument is the host index. Now, the thing to note here is that this function only returns usable IP addresses. So for something like this /24, the .0 address is actually not available to use as a host for a host on the network. It's usually, I think sometimes it's called a network identifier, but it's basically reserved. And the same can be said for the .255, which is the broadcast address for like a /24 like this. So if you specify 0 to obtain the first host on the network, we will actually give you the .1, because that is really the first IP address that you can use for something other than the network itself. So if we redeploy this thing, run the loop from 0 to 4, you basically would get these 5 host IP addresses. And then I started with IPv4 because it's the math. If you're familiar with the networking, it's kind of easy to do the math in your head, especially for something simple like a /24. But we, of course, support IPv6, and all the functions just work with that. So you can parse IPv6s in CIDR notation. You can subnet them into smaller ranges, and you can figure out host IP addresses. And my demo has finished deploying. So let's see what we got here. Yeah, we have our outputs. So we've got our results from the parsing of the IPv4. We've got our subnets from IPv4. We've got our hosts all executed successfully, and all the IPv6 stuff completed as well. So yeah, that's basically my demo. I wonder if there's any questions in the chat about this. Let's take a look.
There are a few people interested to know about Azure reserved IP addresses.
We do not account for Azure reserved IP addresses. Basically, we just made it completely networking agnostic. So you would basically have to account for that when you're choosing to pass an index into the CIDR host function.
Are the reserved IP ranges or IP addresses, is that a relatively static list, or does it change somewhat often? I just don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, we didn't know either, actually.
Okay.
I think by reserved in this context, they're referring to, the first 4 and the last 1 in any subnet is not usable in Azure because it's reserved by the fabric.
And that's universal. Are there ever cases where it's not that?
Nope, that is 100% Azure reserved.
Got it. Well, that's like the only universal thing we've done well. That's good. That's good to know.
I mean, it could just be a parameter on the function to say, exclude Azure.
Or we
Yeah,
could just
I
add
think
4 to it if there's an easy way to do that in the loop.
It's
Yeah,
just one of those things that it'll burn new users. Somebody who's not super experienced with Azure and knows that, you need 4 and you can't use the last one. So it just might make it simpler. But again, I could see in like an AKS cluster where that may or may not be applicable.
Yeah, that was the worry that we had. Like, we didn't actually know about the reserved addresses, but at the same time, we also wanted to make sure that it works in all possible environments, including like if someone's setting up something local on their VMs or AKS clusters. So I think it makes sense to basically make a change to that function and add the ability to just exclude Azure as well. So I think this is something that we'll look into. Yeah. So thanks for mentioning that. There's a question on from Richard. Can we split an address range, let's say a /16, and get 1/24 and 2/28s? Right now, we just made the functions uniform just to get started. If this is something that you would need, can you open an issue for this? And we will look into adding that. I think that's a good suggestion. And it would be also helpful if you can kind of describe what the scenario is. I'll also reply to this message afterwards in the chat in case so others can see. Ari, you had a question in the chat. What happens when the range in the for loop is larger than the address space? You get an error. The deployment will fail. Shared reserved IPs. Yeah, it looks like everybody's interested in reserved IP, so we'll definitely look into it. Yep, looks like those were all the questions about CIDR functions. So back to you, Stephanie, I guess.
Let me reshare the PowerPoint. All right, Alex, it's on you.
Cool. Okay, so the first one about index parameters for really all the Lambda functions. I actually consolidated the 2 issues that were requested on this one just to cover all the Lambda list manipulation functions. There's no real update here. If this is something that's really causing problems, definitely get this one upvoted. We'll definitely do it. It's just a matter of when. Number 2, I think the ask here was to kind of talk about what needs to be done to enable this one, because the experimental feature is available, or is it just getting an update on progress here? I guess I'll just do both. So it's on our short list for what's our current semester. So we're in the Gallium semester is what it's called, which I think is April to October. And it's in the Gallium list. So ideally it's getting done this semester, but we'll see how progress goes. But it will definitely get done. The reason it's an experimental feature is because there's some there's basically a nasty runtime bug with outputting resources with the resource type. So we really just can't enable it yet. So you can try it and you can play around with kind of where it works and where it doesn't. But that's the big blocking issue, is that outputting the resources just doesn't really work very well at the runtime layer. And I think there's
Is
some
that with
additional.
specific resources, or does it work with some but just not others?
It's all what happens is when you output a thing of type resource, we generate a reference, and then you're referencing a reference. So there's nested referencing going on, which just does not work today.
Okay, so it sounds like we probably shouldn't use the preview then.
I wouldn't use I mean, if you can play around with it, but I wouldn't check it in anything important.
Okay.
And you wouldn't succeed most likely in any of the scenarios that you wanted to try.
That's what we need, more things that break things.
Yeah. The graph provider capabilities, I think Marcin touched on it in chat. It's service principals, group creation, or all these are CRUD. So you can CRUD service principals, groups, and then group assignments or group associations. So the context on this is essentially that there's an MS Graph. Graph is like ARM. You may know this already. I certainly got an education on it recently. Graph has effectively resource types, service principals, groups, whatever, and it runs the gamut. There's a ton of graph resource types. They're trying to get those resource types updated to be idempotent, just like ARM APIs. Anything that interacts with the graph APIs today, you've had to implement idempotency basically on your own. So where Terraform has supported AAD, they're essentially taking care of that themselves, but they'd like it to be part of the API. So as those APIs are updated to be idempotent, they'll light up in Graph. But from a Bicep perspective of describing those types and getting type information and all those things, that's basically where it needs to be, and we just need these APIs to be updated. So hopefully that's enough context on that one.
Just to confirm what was said in chat, will that also include apps or applications? Like specifically, if I want to like add a reply URL to an application.
My guess is I will leave this earth before I understand the differences between apps and app registrations and all these other things. But I think we are covering that. I don't know if Marcin or Shenglong knows.
And anything that gets rid of a wall of PowerShell is fantastic.
Cool. Number 4, the source mapping experimental feature. This is another one where we're in kind of like really early phases of kind of getting this done. Basically, this was to unblock. There's the Azure Defender for DevOps tool where they'll scan pipelines and things of that nature, and they wanted the source mapping feature for that. It works. It works at a kind of basic level of giving you a line number, but not a position number. But there's caveats to that. So it's another one that's like, if you want to try it, go for it. But there's not, I would say, a ton of compelling stuff there. And then Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell don't do anything with it. So when an error comes back from ARM, we don't do the extra work to take the source map into account today. That's what we would need to enable to kind of start to get some value out of this one. Any other questions on source mapping?
So kind of another one, just don't use it for now.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
New line breaks for ternary for and if statements. So Anthony is on vacation right now, and I know he has the most context on the new line breaks. I don't think there's anything technically blocking us from doing this. I think we just started with implementing what we implemented so far. So I don't think I think we're committed to doing this. And I don't think the PR is very complicated if anybody wants to do it. But I don't think it's something that we're planning to take care of anytime soon. So this would be another one to upvote. And then 6, the what if or pre-flight short circuiting. This is another one. Obviously, this has been a very long-standing issue. It's just one of those unfortunate things. We have this on our short list for gallium as well. So this is another one that we hope to work on between now and October. And if we don't get to it then, we'll get to it after that. You're really going to see overall deployments kind of take another kind of deep dive on quality and fixing some of these nagging things. We've had a lot of big features that are really just now starting to come out, like Bicep parameters and extensibility and custom types and all these sorts of things. Now that these are getting done, we'll transition more to these really long-standing, frustrating issues that we've known about that have been kind of hard to deal with, frankly. So in order to fix them properly, we really need to focus on it, and that means just kind of like putting aside a lot of feature work. So you will see us do that relatively soon, but I can't give you any precise ETAs just yet. Whit, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess one more follow-up on the AED provider. Presumably, I guess y'all have some kind of an open channel to talk with them about. Is there any chance you could reiterate to that team that, as changes are made, they shouldn't actually return as successful until those changes have propagated so that they can be depended on for downstream ARM components? I know that's been kind of a problem with RBAC in particular. So especially if they're kind of going through doing an overhaul, that'd be great if they kind of made that a key part of their new implementation.
You're talking about like when you do role assignments in Azure today, and
yeah,
they don't
then you
propagate
essentially
everywhere?
Yeah, well, exactly, because then you try and use it, and you don't actually have those permissions yet.
Yeah.
So really, you just have to assign it, put a little 5-minute sleep on it. That makes your deployments just needlessly slow. And even after 5 minutes, it may still not be there. So you check it.
Yeah.
You may have checked it, and wherever it checked it from, it works there. But then you try and use it again, still fails. Since there's no really retry mechanism still in the deployments, it makes RBAC really challenging.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, just as an aside, we have started implementing wait and retry. We will do that. And so at least that makes this a little bit less of a nightmare to deal with. But this is one of those things that actually this should also be in our short list of quality stuff. There's something weird happening with load balancing in ARM. So the reality is that if you have 30 regions or 100 regions, and as you add more regions, you can't replicate everywhere instantly. It's just physically impossible. So what needs to happen is for all the requests to be co-located in one region. So at least you can execute whatever needs to happen in one region. The problem is that sometimes you'll get rerouted in funny ways to other regions, and that's when errors like this occur. So that's the real fix that needs to happen, and we'll have to really start to focus on that one too. That's another like lingering dragon that we've kind of not been focusing on.
Sure, that's fair. But yeah, I mean, anything helps because anything's better than just a blind wait X minutes and hope that it works.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear, it will be that in Bicep. So you will say wait for some determined amount of time and retry for X amount of times, but at least it's in context.
Sure. And honestly, even that is better than at least the current.
Cool. Any other questions about any of the requested updates?
Can I ask for one more?
Sure.
Is there any chance of turning off the MSFT bot, closing all these older issues?
Oh yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we are attempting to clean up at least some stale things in the GitHub repo, and so we are working on this Fabric bot to auto close. Essentially, the logic is if we've asked you for something and you haven't responded, we're going to close the issue. In I think 7 days is the new time window. But there obviously, when you do automation like that, you're going to screw some things up. So we've sent a lot of emails over the past week, which was to be expected. And we'll continue to dial it in and get it more accurate over time. But we did need to do something. So I do apologize about kind of you all experiencing the growing pains of that. But we will do our best to get better at it, because we do need to just do some hygiene on those things. Does that make sense, Whit, or everyone on the call?
It does, but I mean, does that mean that things that are just kind of in a, you haven't asked anything for it, we don't really have anything new to contribute, it's just kind of a lingering open idea for consideration? Should we just bump those?
Well, yeah. So the intention is to keep those open. It's not to close them. So if it has a milestone of committed, we won't auto close it. We screwed that up, but we'll get that right. So
is that a tag or something?
There's a milestone. There's like a real thing in GitHub projects for milestones. And so if it has a milestone of committed or any other milestone like 0.19 or 0.20, even if it has a waiting response, we won't close it at that point, because that's the real acknowledgement that it's like in our pipeline. If it has something like needs upvote and it's not milestoned, that means that we don't want to close it. We kind of acknowledge that it's a thing that people want, but we haven't committed to it. And so we won't close those either, with the intention of collecting more feedback or upvotes or whatever. It's only things like, we've asked you a question, we need you to respond to move it forward. Will we close it?
Fair enough.
A week is a little bit short in case someone goes on holidays. Just a worst case scenario.
Yeah, we can continue to play around with the time window and see how often that comes up. You do have power, as you all have exercised, which we appreciate, to reopen it. So it just takes a comment to get the issue reopened if we've done something in error. But fair.
Right, if you can reopen, that's fine. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions or thoughts about the auto closing behavior? Okay, cool. I think with that, we'll open it up to general Q&A. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yep, those were the last of our topics. So the rest of this time can be Q&A.
I don't know if there was anything particularly in chat that came up. Or if we missed your question in chat, please bring it back to our attention.
Did we give an update on when to expect VNet integration for ACI and deployment scripts?
Yes, I think that was part of the future roadmap. I think the goal is to have it next month. It's a lot of external dependencies on this one. We have to get all sorts of approvals to be special, essentially. So we're going through getting all those approvals, and then making sure that everything works as expected after those approvals, because we've been surprised by a few different things, which is why this has taken us longer than expected. So we're getting into the late stages of the updated implementation for this.
Okay. Sounds good. Chris Lewis, is there a function to convert ARM parameters to a Bicep parameter file? This is something that Mohammed has been working on. That's the params decompiler to decompile a JSON params file into a Bicep param file.
And then I see there's a question from Richard on the public registry and integrating with Carmel. We are trying to get all of the Carmel content into the registry. So we're just kind of figuring out how to get that done. So I don't know if we have a precise ETA, but the work is definitely in progress. I don't know if it'll be in specific chunks or if it'll be one big wave, but we are working towards that goal. Just scrolling through. But not seeing anything particularly burning. Yeah. Any other last call for questions? Oh, Ben just asked another question about the parameters file, Stephanie.
Exposing the compiled bicep parameter file. Not 100% sure what that means. Means that read the emojis.
I think we'll be able to, like, it'll behave in a similar way to how we compile the Bicep files. You'll still have the JSON available if you want to. But all of the PowerShell and CLI will be able to consume the Bicep parameter files or JSON parameter files. Just depends how you like to run your stuff.
Thanks, Marcin. Okay, asking to see the roadmap. Custom types should be next month.
I think Whit was specifically asking about the importing of custom types.
Sharing of custom types.
I don't think we have a committed ETA for that yet. I think this is one of those gnarly design exercises. I know Johnny has been spending a lot of time. I think he's due for right now, but he's been spending a lot of time on closing on the design of it. I think the implementation is relatively reasonable once we've figured out what it should look like.
Okay, so the thing that's coming next month is more just a formal release of what is currently a preview.
Yeah, you won't have to opt in with experimental features.
Okay. Any significant changes coming with that? Or, just the removal of the flag?
I am trying to think. I don't know, Stephanie, if you remember anything specific.
Can you repeat that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess, are there any specific changes coming with the inclusion of custom types apart from just removing that flag? Are there any last minute changes from preview?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Well, I guess we'll find out next month.
So. Yes, you'll have to find out next month. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
We have some ideas in the future of what we want to implement, but right now I think just removing the experimental flag is the goal.
And the one other thing that'll happen is when we will basically automatically switch on the symbolic name code generation if you use types. But if you don't use types in your Bicep file, we'll still use the old like the classic code generation. So today that was triggered with enabling the feature flag, but now it'll just be it'll be enabled automatically by adding the basically a type definition somewhere in the file. Because the types feature depends on symbolic name code gen.
Does that change anything about performance or anything, or is this just is what it is?
It shouldn't change performance. It just should. It basically just changes the JSON format because we needed some things that are only present in the new JSON format to make types work.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Basically, just to add a little more detail to that, we have this new format for the ARM template that we generate that accomplishes a lot for us. That we can get into the details at some point. But basically, we need to make sure that we didn't screw anything up. So those of you who have been testing experimental features have already been implicitly testing this for us. So the goal when we release it is you shouldn't notice anything. But if you do notice anything, you start using custom types on more complex templates or what have you. It's possible that something may break that we didn't predict. So we are going to keep a really close eye on it as we do that and be really responsive if we do introduce any issues on that one.
I for one would be really curious to see a technical deep dive into the changes, but I've got to say I've been happily thrilled with never actually having to dissect an ARM template since Bicep came out. Cool. So yeah, I have moved from that, and I'm happy digging through what's changed, but yeah, it's great not actually having to piece through that anymore.
Cool.
That's what we wanted to hear, by the way.
I've been looking forward to it for a long time.
There's a question about the Azure developer CLI, about whether anything they've implemented specifically is independent of the Bicep language. The answer to that is yes. So the AZD team is focusing on the scenarios that they want to enable and are kind of building some extra functionality into the AZD utilities as needed. One interesting thing is that they did something with basically allowing you to read parameter files or environment variables from within parameter files. And so as a result of the work that we've done on that, they're going to retire that functionality from AZD and just use what we provide. So there may continue to be cases where they do things nicely, and we want to get that into kind of the core of Bicep and the deployment tools. So that's kind of, they're on top of what we build. So they are different things. I'm curious if people have tried out AZD and Azure development environments. Those are two things that I think went GA this week at Builds. And they've spent a lot of time on a lot of different functionality for enabling kind of the end-to-end on Azure. So curious how that's going so far for people that may be using Bicep and deploying applications with AZD. Is it possible to reduce all the verbosity of JSON error messages? We want to spend some time on the deployment commands, the AZ deployment command and the PowerShell deployment commands, to really just review the whole thing, to make the outputs of progress during the deployment a lot simpler and more like if you go into the portal and look at deployment operations, and have reading error messages be cleaner, just to format even just that JSON response. There's a lot of easy wins that we can pick up by spending some time on that. So that's another one of those like long-standing frustrations that we haven't been able to prioritize, but I think we'll be working on that in the relatively short term. Yeah, and I think to Jan's point, I mean, it's not necessarily about removing detail from the response. It's more of that it's unnecessarily noisy. It's wrapped in JSON, so we can format the response a lot better. We can always dump out the JSON if you need that, and you can interrogate the results. But if you're just doing everything kind of interactive, I think there's a lot of improvements we can make just to quality of life. Makes sense, Camila. If you just had a switch for fix my scoping errors, I'd be happy to the deployment commandlets. Is that because you end up targeting the wrong scope? You think you're going to put a subscription, you deploy a resource group or something of that nature? We can wait and see on that one. We do want to there shouldn't be so many deployment commands. You shouldn't have to think about which deployment command to pick depending on what scope you're deploying to. That's something that should be easier to decide with one command. So we will try to consolidate that as well, but we have to kind of figure out, there's some interesting mechanics in getting that done.
I guess just as I was thinking about the other day, why can Bicep not remember the location that is passed into one thing and just kind of remember it through all the children? I guess just as a weird quirk of ARM, if I have a resource group in East US, why don't all the resources that I then assign to that resource group then also live in East US? Why do I have to specifically dictate that for each one?
The short answer is you have to, because the API requires it. The RP API requires you to pick a location, and it's theoretically possible to pick a different location from your resource group.
Well, and it's not a requirement by Azure in any means. You can have a resource group in one region and the resources in a different region, and the resource group is a logical organizational construct that can cross regions.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. We use it
Okay,
for
fair enough.
recovery service vaults, for DR, where the vault is in one region and the caching storage accounts are in another.
Okay, then why does the resource group have a location?
Because we pick a region to store metadata. It has to do with kind of the base metadata storage and how that data is replicated, which region it's replicated from, and things of that nature. And actually, yeah. So
okay, well, fair enough.
I was going to say inertia. It's just always been done that way. But Alex, great explanation on that.
Yeah. I think there's a real conversation to be had, and I know it has been discussed various times over the years. Like probably 99.9% of the time, you do want it to be the same location as your resource group. But to Chris's point, there are exceptions. So there's probably a better way to do it than the way it works today. But those are the reasons that it works that way today.
I think Microsoft actually recommends to not co-locate so many resources in a resource group, because in the event of a regional failure, you can't update that metadata. So in your resource vault example, if let's say Central is down, you can't actually make any modifications to your object that's in that resource group.
Yeah, there's definitely some region failover DR considerations into what regions you pick. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about this, and but if half your app is in one region, then your app's broken anyway. So it's like there's a lot. DR is really complicated. But
if there's a region that's down, there's going to be a lot going on.
That's true. It opened. Yeah, we can't even get into it.
That's when I retire.
Yeah. A well-placed lightning strike from God can do quite a bit of damage.
Happened in South Central about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Any other big ones?
Still great learning experience, because I didn't know that. And I just I knew that there's some cross-regional things, but usually they deploy to a global location, not just a specific one. So just another thing to think about.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's just a bunch of Azure is just a bunch of apps running in a bunch of different regions, and the regions need to be reconciled in some capacity by something. And the more regions we add to Azure, you increase the matrix of complexity. I think it's a logarithmic or exponential problem rather than a linear problem. So one of the things, and this is not something where I'm personally directly overseeing, but you'll see us put more into Azure to make dealing with region replication and consistency kind of more easier to deal with, easier to understand what's happening at a lower level. Right now, we just kind of wave our hands and say, hey, everything will get replicated everywhere eventually, so don't worry about it. But it's becoming more of a problem as Azure gets bigger.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex, along those lines, is there ever any thoughts on finishing up the region enums and that kind of stuff for that validation on your templates? Like an AZ-regions or something like that.
Yeah, the reason we didn't do it way back when, I think, is that, if you're deploying to a government cloud versus a public cloud, the list of regions changes. So you would need to code all of that in to really have the code be robust. But we probably could kind of relax our strictness on that one, and at least just have like az.public.locations as an enum or something like that.
Yeah. I also know that there's all the staging regions that are confusing, and
yeah, right.
Isn't there also the ability for having custom regions for the Azure Stack Hub series?
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of interesting stuff on region selection.
I forgot
And
about
so-
Stack.
Yeah, I may be misremembering on that one, but that was something I thought was.
Stack is a huge curveball to the world.
Yeah, and like our connected clusters, and there's all sorts of fun stuff there. But it doesn't mean we can't make it easier. Like I think there still could be some constants that we just make available that just to make some things easier.
All good.
Cool. Any other major ones that we haven't covered in the chat or that people have? Okay. Sounds like we're all set.
Thanks everyone for coming then. Really appreciate it. See you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone.
See you.